Okay, yeah, sure. Hey everyone, I'm Kevin. Really happy to be here today. Um, and yeah, I think today's gonna be really exciting because we're going to be building towards like the culmination of everything you've talked about for the past couple of weeks, right? Because at the very beginning, you learned about logic, these programming controls, right? And then you had loops, and then you sort of dived into some of the more interesting components of App Inventor, where you have buttons and things where you can build things where people can interact with your app. So today, basically what I'm going to do is you're not going to be seeing anything new, anything that you haven't seen before, but we're going to put these things together in a way that you probably haven't seen before, because most of these lessons have been very compartmentalized. You know, you only talk about logic, only one component of everything. But now we're just going to put it all together into something that's actually useful and that you might want to share with your friends. And I think that's something that's really cool about MIT App Inventor, which is that you can start building apps that are actually useful within, how long have you guys been in class? Maybe like a couple of weeks, right? Or less than a month, which is really, really crazy. If you did this with any other language, any other environment, you'd have to be waiting like 1 or 2 years before you could build something of this complexity. So that's really awesome. And that's really exciting. And that's what we'll be diving into today. So roughly how this is going to work is I'll sort of introduce the premise behind the app we're trying to build. I'll give you guys a couple of moments to load up your own IDE on MIT App Better. And the hope is that you'll follow along with me, because I think one of the best ways to learn is to do. And so the hope is that you'll follow along with me, that we'll build this together. You guys will basically tell me how to make the app. You know, there's going to be a lot of things that you should know that I probably don't know about MIT App Better, and you're going to teach me about it. And then we'll build this together. We're going to create an app basically that does something really cool, really useful, something that's becoming increasingly important with the rise of this new Delta variant thing. And so yeah, let's dive right in. Let me go ahead and share my screen, and we'll talk about the premise. We'll talk about this app that we're trying to build. So hopefully the screen is now shared. I think it is. Uh-oh. So yeah, we're gonna be building this thing. Basically, the premise is that, you know, with the whole COVID thing and the whole Delta variant coming back, testing is becoming increasingly important. It's really important to know whether you have COVID or not, and so this can help you protect yourself by isolating, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. But this information is all really scattered online, and it's sort of hard to tell where you're supposed to go if you're in a certain area, especially if you're somewhere where you aren't familiar. Like say you're on vacation in Alaska, you get a little bit sick, you want to know whether you have COVID, and it's just very confusing. It's sort of not easy to figure out where your testing centers are. So we're going to be building an app that takes in your location wherever you are in the world, and it'll spit out a bunch of hospitals sorted by distance to you or sorted by some metric. And then you can click on any one of these hospitals and you can get Google Map directions to take you there. So, you know, this isn't necessarily something that doesn't exist already. You can go to certain websites and do this or that to find out these locations. But the cool part is that you're going to be building it yourself using all these tools that you learn. The people that are building the tools that you've seen before are like seasoned professionals. They've been programming for many, many years, and that's their full-time job. But literally 4 months after you started to code, you're going to be able to build something like this, which I think is really awesome. So let's dive right in. Basically, at the core of all of this is going to be something called an API. You guys should have talked about this maybe last week or a couple weeks ago, but just as a refresher, an API is basically a tool, a sort of a pipeline through which you can steal other people's work. You can save yourself the time to do something that other people have already done for you. So common examples might be weather APIs, where you don't have to set up your entire weather station to set up temperatures, to record temperatures, and figure out whether it's going to rain or not. All you have to do is simply ask the endpoint. You simply just ask a question: what is the weather at my current location? And it'll give it to you without any sort of work on your part. So in this case, we're going to be getting the information about all your COVID test centers from, again, an API. So this one is public. It's documented on Postman. I don't really know who hosts it, but you can see that there's this sort of documentation that we have to parse through to figure out how we can ask questions in this way. Because all you do with APIs is basically ask questions and get answers. That's like the intuitive way of putting it. So let's sort of look through this documentation. I found this thing on the internet, just like through a quick Google search. This thing says COVID test centers in all US 50 states. And it says we have this request. This is the request that's documented here. So let's sort of parse this and see what's going on. So this is a GET request, which you probably are familiar with. Basically, you ask a question and you get an answer, right? So this is the URL. It's sort of like any URL you would type into your computer, like if you wanted to go to YouTube or Facebook or Wikipedia or anything. But it's a little bit different because there's this weird thing. This is like this weird question mark thing with a key and a value in it. And in this case, it's specifying which state you're in. So this is actually the parameter of the request. You should have learned about this again a couple of weeks ago. But in this case, you're basically saying, go to this URL, this sort of website that hosts all this information about where the COVID test centers are, and ask it a question, right? Like where are the COVID test centers in the state? And we're going to specify Alaska or something like that. And actually, I think one of the best ways to sort of interact with APIs and figure out what they do is just to type them, is to just use them. So if it's a GET request, there's something very simple that you can do to try out the API, and that's literally just copy and paste it into your browser. And it should give you a whole lot of stuff. This one gives us many, many lines. Oh, actually not that many lines. So there are 5 documented testing centers in Alaska, according to this API. So you're gonna see all this weird stuff. There are these weird straight brackets, curly brackets, all these weird colons with keys and values on them. We'll talk about what all this means for now, but later. But for now, if you just look a little closer at like one of these examples, you'll sort of see things that should be familiar, right? Center name. This is the name of the place where you can get your COVID test. This is the address. If you pasted this into Google, you could get your directions there. Latitude and longitude. This is going to be really useful because if we want to plot this thing on a map, then that's going to be important because that's the only way we can put a marker. And then there's a URL. This is interesting. So we can paste this URL into our browser and see what's going on. So this is additional information. This is actually quite cool. So this API gives us not only the location, the city, the state, all that, but it also gives us some information about maybe how, the hours, the news release that came with this COVID testing center opening. So this is also something that's really useful that could help people be more informed of which testing centers are actually good for them and which ones aren't. Because some of them might have restrictions, some of them might have only one type of test and you don't want that type of test. This is all information that you might want to know. And it's all encoded in this URL, which is awesome. They also have stuff like drive-through, whether you can drive through and get your test. These are all things that are important to you. And you can sort of see they're encoded in this weird language where you have brackets and braces and keys and values everywhere. But we'll learn how to parse these properly in a moment. And it's really cool. So there's been a request in the chat that I post this URL. So let me go ahead and post it. You can also, so you can either visit the documentation and copy the links, or you can just click this and it will take you to the specific request. So this was for Alaska. Why don't we try another state? I'm from Texas, so we'll type in TX. You can see that this response is far, far longer. If you just look at the right side of the bar, there are so many more documented testing centers in Texas. And the information is all the same. You have the center, the name of the location where you can get it. You have the address, city, state, blah, blah, blah. So yeah, this language that it's encoded in might look really strange and really obtuse when you first look at it. But if you just look a little bit closer, you'll see a lot of types of data that you recognize, which is really nice. And we're going to be taking advantage of this to build our app. So yeah, I feel like at this point we have a pretty good understanding of what this thing does, right? It's basically a website where you can ask it a question. If I'm in this state, I'm in the state Alaska, I want this certain type of information. I want to know about all the COVID testing centers in Alaska, and that's pretty much all it's going to give you. What it spits out is this weird language that we don't really understand, but we're gonna figure it out. Eventually, when we get into MIT App Center, there will be ways that we can parse this kind of stuff easily, and we'll get really familiar with this, so don't worry about it. But it's pretty obvious that this information is relevant to the thing that we want to do. All right, so that's the first step, right? The first step is figuring out what kinds of information that you have to work with. So that's always the first step. But then after you get that kind of information, you also have to ask the question, how do I want to display it the best, right? I think it's commonly accepted that there's a lot to do. I mean, there's a lot of space for improvement in terms of using APIs and visualizing them better. So given a bunch of information, how can you communicate it to people in the best manner possible so that it's most useful to them? That's basically the idea. And that's where we have to start thinking about all the different user interface components that we want to put into this app. And I think this is where you guys can give me some ideas. I don't, you know, you guys were using this app, like just think about it for yourself. If you're using an app that could help you find COVID testing centers, what kinds of features would you want in it? Feel free to unmute or throw your ideas in the chat.
Wait, are we going to basically do something like navigation?
Yeah, that's a really good
Like
idea.
we put location sensors, latitude, longitude, and then the nearest hospitals, latitude, longitude, and then navigation API to guide us there.
Yeah, that's a really awesome idea. So that's actually a couple steps ahead of where I was thinking. Because you're definitely right. Like if you have a location, it'd definitely be very useful if you could actually navigate to that location, preferably with turn by turn, right? Like if Google Maps could take you there, that'd be awesome. So that's a really good idea. Does anyone else have something a little bit more basic? Like in terms of the app, right? What would it look like? What would your ideal app look like? What kinds of components would you like? And to give you some ideas, like you might want to pull up the MIT App Inventor interface and just like look through, you know, how would you design the app? Okay, so we have another really good idea. There's a map, right? Because if you have a location, if you've been localized to wherever you are right now, you definitely want to be able to see, you know, you need to be able to see what kinds of hospitals are around you. Maybe your priority is getting there as soon as possible. So then you just choose the closest one. And that's a really good idea. If you think about other apps that you've used like Uber or Google Maps, wait, that's a map app. That's a bad example. Uber or some other like sort of app where location plays a role, then there's definitely always a map on it. And that's a really good way to visualize data. So those are really good ideas. And we're going to be building all those components into our app today. So before I go on, I think now is a good time for you to pull up MIT App Inventor because we're going to be creating this together. Pull up MIT App Inventor, create a new project, and then once you're done, just like throw a reaction, throw like a thumbs up reaction, or just put something in the chat so that I know you're ready. Okay, great. Yeah, lots of yeses coming in. I'll give people like 30 more seconds before I start.
Wait, what's this project for? Like, what does it do?
It's going to just accumulate all the COVID testing centers that are near you, and it'll provide useful information and useful actions that you can take to get to them. That's sort of like the one-line summary.
Oh yeah, you can also try and do something like step by step.
Oh, so what do you mean by that?
So basically, yeah, basically it's like this. When you get directions, it will say the first directions, and then there's a button that will appear that says go to the next direction, which tells the second, and then goes all the way to like all the directions. And basically, if you're at the last step and you press it again, it'll say that you finished, like you arrived.
Yeah, that's actually a feature that MIT App Inventor implements. I think in your navigation, you sort of perfectly described what the navigation module does, and that's awesome. So that's definitely one option that we can take. At the very end, when we actually get to this part, I'll share with you guys a really cool thing that you can do using this I think, more obscure feature called the activity starter that can take you straight to Google Maps. And if you ever use Google Maps and their turn-by-turn directions, they're pretty great. Like you can go literally wherever you want and it'll give you turn-by-turn directions um, to get there. So we can explore both options, but once we get there, we can talk more about this. Cool. So does anyone need more time with pulling up their IDE? Okay, sounds good. So why don't we just get started? In this app, I think like there are a couple of things you need to consider when thinking about apps, right? You have the input, which is whatever the user needs to, whatever information you need to be able to display what you want to display. So that's the input part. And then there's also output. Output's considerably more complicated in this case because we want to display the data in a lot of different ways. So let's just go ahead and start with the input. So for input, we'd probably want to give them a couple of options. Maybe they can use their GPS to localize their location, or maybe they want to type it in. So since the GPS is a little bit more finicky, I'm just gonna go with the we're gonna go with the type things in approach, where you can simply just type in where you are and it'll look you up and you'll be able to figure out where all the things are near you. So for that, let's create a horizontal arrangement. Let's make it the full width so that it looks nice. And then we can throw what is it called, a text box in there. And then we can have a text box and then a button. The button pretty much should just say go. So you can just hit go. The width is automatic. We'll have the text box fill the parent. So it looks like this. We can actually make the thing like 15% so that it looks a little bit nicer. The hint, let's say type your location here. And make sure to always name your components properly so that you can reference them later. So we can call it text box input. And then your button should just be button go. I like to name my components with what they are first and then the name afterwards. So together they sort of tell you what this component does. So at this point, you should be able to see, like, if you pull up your emulator or you connect your component to a companion, then you'll get a text box input. And then you'll be able to type something in and let it go. So other than that, maybe there are other things that you want to use, like a map, for example, that we had a from earlier. We had a suggestion. We can make the width fill parent. And then maybe you also want a list view, right? Because you might have a bunch of different hospitals that you want to display in a list. And then eventually people can click on this list and display all the information about a hospital. So I think we'll just leave these names as they are. And then we can create let's create another component where people have some like information, people can view some information about the hospital. So vertical arrangement, and then we can add a bunch of labels like label 1, label 2, label 3. So maybe in our labels, we have some information that we want to display. For example, the name of the location. We might want to display the address because that's useful. And then, oh wait, that's a rename. So this is label address. We can change the name to address. And then finally, maybe there's something else that we want, which is, let's just leave it there for now. I'm not really completely sure what we need it for, but we'll just add some placeholders and then we can fill it in later. And then let's call this label name. So you have this, and then let's just make this full width for now. This will display all the information that we need, and then maybe in the future we need to reduce the width if we want to add more buttons to do more things or something like that. And then go ahead and take your map and make it fill the parent in terms of height, so that your screen looks very nice with a big map and then some information in the middle with some text box, etc., and then a box at the bottom. So your screen should look pretty much like this. And if it doesn't, go ahead and make sure to copy this down as much as you can before we move on, because we're gonna start working with the logic in a second. So in the meantime, I'm gonna pull up a an emulator of sorts, or basically it's just my phone but connected to you guys. And so this will allow me to show you what's going on my screen. In the meantime, if you have any questions, let me know in the chat. But your screen should look approximately like this. All right, just give it a moment. But in the meantime, we can look at other things. So you have this interface, right? So what do you all think should be the next step once we do this interface? What's the first piece of logic that we have to create? And just like a hint, just think about like what triggers an event, right? Because once somebody types something in to the once they type their location in there, what do they do? What is the next thing that the user does? Right, exactly. They click the button, right? So then to handle the click that they give you in the button, we're going to have to create an event handler for the button. So if we go to our blocks, we can go to our blocks. Let's create an event handler for button go. And so let's say that when the button is clicked, what do we want to do, right? So I guess the first thing is we need to be able to figure out, from this location, which they're just going to be typing in some kind of plain text thing. They could be typing in Plano, Texas. They could be typing Boston, Massachusetts. They could be typing New York City or anything. So how do we figure out from this input what state they're in? Does anyone have any ideas?
Okay.
Repeat. Just repeatedly look through the name part and then keep on looking. And if you find a match, then put it.
Yeah,
And
so that's
else,
actually a
if you
wonderful
don't
idea.
find a match,
What's
then say
we
that
should
you
we should
didn't
either
do
use
right.
we should either use like some kind of dictionary to like list all of that hospitals in there, and then use that repeat.
I see. Okay. Interesting ideas. So that's actually going to cover a lot of the cases already, because if your person is nice enough to be typing in the state right after the city, for example, if they type in Boston, Massachusetts, then you can parse Massachusetts being from that location and blah, blah, blah. But there are some like tricky cases here, right? Because you have, let's say somebody doesn't type in the city, doesn't type in the state, and you just type it in Plano. There's ambiguity,
If
right?
block.
Because there are multiple Planos.
We need if block instead. We also need if block to see if it's actually like typed in correctly or something like that. If
All
it's
right,
like
that's a
typed
really good
wrong,
idea. Input checking.
it's gonna throw an error
Wait,
or
what we did
notify us.
this? What we did this? So basically, if they, like, if it matches, then set like another variable to that variable, and to that to text, and basically, if the variable is equal to nothing, then please put in a hospital name. Because that one's wrong.
Okay, awesome. So that's actually that's a wonderful idea. So like usually the thing is people are stupid, right? They'll use your app incorrectly all the time. And a big part of combating that is to do input checking. So if somebody doesn't type in a state, then you'll just get mad at them and you can just reject their input and ask them to try again. So that's a great idea. What I'm going to do is a little bit tricky. It's like something that you may not have thought of because, you know, I only mentioned that we're using one API. But in fact, when you're creating apps, you can use any number of APIs. You can use an unlimited amount of APIs because APIs are useful. They basically just allow you to do no work and reap all the benefits. So essentially, we're going to be using another API that takes in some input and spits out an output. Does anyone want to guess based on our discussion what this API is going to take in and spit out? Yeah, okay. So exactly. So that's a totally valid guess. So like you could have a city as an input and then a state as an output. So that's a really good guess. Anyone else want to give it a shot? Current location to city state. Yes. So that is actually the correct answer. And you know, you may never have guessed this because there are a million APIs out there that all do slightly different things. But yeah, like we're going to be using an API. There's probably an API out there that takes in some kind of location, whether it be something that you typed in or like a set of coordinates and spits out something that is that gives you your state back. So the one that we're actually going to be using is called a certain is a certain thing. It's called geocode. Geocode coordinates to state to US state. So if we Google this, .xyz. So geocode has an API, this very cool API. Let's take a look at what it does. It says, okay, this is, you know, ask a URL for a certain thing, and then it's going to take in coordinates. So we're gonna have to figure out how to convert your location into coordinates, but that's not a big deal, as we'll see, because MIT App Vendor is great. But you take in the coordinates and then it spits out something. We need to figure out what it spits out. So to figure that out, I think again, the best way is literally just to try it. If we call this, not JSON, it's -1, JSON equals 1, it'll spit out this. So Westminster, this is actually not in the United States, so it won't give you a state name. But if we type in something that is that actually is in the US, I'm just gonna guess. I don't quite remember where my house is located, but this is approximately right. Okay, maybe that's not right. Let's see. Okay, so these are some coordinates. I would guess it's about -30 something. And maybe 90. So it's not giving us, okay, so it says we are in the high seas of the Indian Ocean. So clearly this is not my house. We can try again. Like we can keep trying. Maybe I flipped it. So let's try 90-30. Okay, so this is like, I have no clue where this is. I cannot read that. Okay, but anyways, you sort of
That's
get the
probably
point.
Russia. That's probably in somewhere in Russia, due to the name.
Yeah. Yeah. Okay. So anyways, you sort of get the point. We have the coordinates and it'll give us some like information about wherever we are. So that's what we're gonna have to take advantage of this. So let's go ahead and try seeing how we can integrate this into MIT App Better. In MIT App Better, we can create a function, right? We can create a procedure that's going to give us some information and then spit something out or in some manner or some way. So if we type in like some function, we ask it to get the state with some kind of input. We're going to be using latitude and longitude. What we want it to do is we're going to ask it to create a web request. So we're going to need connectivity. We're going to need to drag in a web component. And this web component is going to be for the state. So let's call it web get state. So what this component is going to do is it's going to get the state of wherever you are, and that's what we're going to do. So to use the web component to submit a request, you're gonna have to do a few things. You're gonna have to, first of all, set the URL to whatever it may be. Our API is this, so we're gonna wanna set this in to, we're gonna wanna set this as our URL. But notice that we have these parameters that we have to include in the URL. So we actually have to use a join here to join all the different things that we need together. I think we're gonna need a bunch of joins, maybe like 5 of them or something. So it's gonna give you this, then you're gonna have to put in the latitude, and then you're gonna have to put in the longitude. So let's put in the latitude, then put in the longitude. In between, you're gonna need a comma. So let's put in a comma. And then at the very end, you need this JSON thing where it's gonna return the request in JSON. So this is it. That's basically it. And then what you need to do now is all you need to do is call get. So this sends the request to the server. You're basically asking it a question, and then it's gonna give you some information back. And once you actually get the information back, it's gonna call this callback called got text. And we don't really know what's inside of it. And again, the best way to figure out is literally just to try it. So we can, for example, set the text of label 3 to this output text, just for debugging, just to see what it looks like. So let's just set the text in label 3 to the response content, and we can take a look. All right. So to be able to do this, we're going to need to open up our emulator. So I'm going to try to do this while my phone starts up. If you have any questions, feel free to ask. Cool. So my phone is now on. Now I need to open up Cast so that I can cast my phone. Remind me later, and then I can start casting. So it should give me a confirmation if we're on the same Wi-Fi network. Hopefully. Oh, it declined the request. Interesting. All right. Bear with me as I sort of figure all of these technical things out. But it should work in just a moment. Use your phone's AirDroid cast to scan. Okay, let's scan this thing. Oh, interesting. So this is not working. We are on the same Wi-Fi network, I believe. Okay, so I'm gonna give it another try, and if this still doesn't work, oh, it does not support remote network. Please have your device and your computer connect to the same LAN or purchase the service. Okay, so it looks like it thinks that we're not connected to the same network, but we are, which is interesting. So let me try this again. It's gonna connect, and then hopefully it'll work. Sorry for the technical issues. If you have any questions, feel free to ask them now while we're dealing with this. So actually, it looks like my phone is just not connecting to the Wi-Fi for some reason. So that's not good. Okay. Here's what I'll do. I will try to do this on my iPad and see if I can cast the iPad to use this. But yeah, does anyone else have this working so far? If you do, please let me know in the chat, and because that'd be really great if any of you have this working up to this point. So does anyone? And if you're lost, feel free to let me know.
Wait, why aren't you using location sensor?
So the location sensor will come a little bit later. We're not gonna use that for now because it's a little bit finicky and it's hard to use. Sometimes it works,
There
sometimes it doesn't.
isn't even location sensor. You didn't even put it there.
Yeah, we're gonna be using it later. Because for now it's a little bit difficult to use for us to use it for now. All right. Really sorry about this. Let's see if this works. But anyways, like the point of all of this is that you sort of have to be able to use um, the emulator to be able to develop these apps, because it's often very important to be able to see the outputs of your application. Like we want to be able to get this latitude and longitude and see what it's like when it actually works. But one thing that we have forgotten to do here actually is we need to figure out what to do when the button is clicked, right? And so that's actually what Brandon was talking about. We need to drag in the location sensor because our location sensor is going to be able to convert the input that we give it to longitude and latitude. So if we look at this, if we look at the location sensor, we go to the location sensor, there should actually be a sort of method that says latitude from address and longitude from address, which is awesome because the address is literally just the city and the state that we have put in, and we just need to call the location sensor to get the latitude and longitude. So what we can actually do here is we can call get state. We can say we want to get the state, and the latitude is just the latitude from the address, and there's a longitude here. And what is the location name? Well, that's just the input that we gave it, right? So that's just the text that we got here, and we just want to feed it in the same text to be able to get the state. And so now we're going to be calling the state, we're going to be calling the city, and then we're going to be able to use all of this. So I'm going to go ahead and see if this works. I can connect my companion using my iPad. And let's see if it works. So it looks like my emulator is also not working on my iPad, which is quite unfortunate. So here's what I'll do. I'm going to do something. I'm going to create a hotspot and see if this works. It should take me like less than 2 minutes, but it is critical to this sort of lesson. So that's why I want to make sure to be able to do it. Okay, looks like it finally worked in some manner. And we'll see how good it is. It is connecting, and it'll connect eventually. So thanks so much for sticking with me. It's finally working, and I can finally go to MIT App Inventor and connect. So I can scan my QR code from the companion. We can connect our App Inventor companion, and let's see what happens. So it's gonna connect. Let me show you my screen. This is what's happening on my phone screen. And basically we have our interface. So it looks pretty nice. It's got all the components that we asked for. We can type our location. I'm in New York City. So let's type in New York City and hit go. So what should theoretically happen is you get back some stuff. So clearly you see at the very right side, it's shown us like this thing called application JSON char set UTF-8, which is interesting, right? Like that's not really what we expected. So I think what actually happened is that this text box is too small to display everything. So that's why we're gonna, let's just make this not filled apparent, just automatic. And let's add another label here called another label, which is added at the bottom here, label 4. And let's set the text of label 4 to actually be that.
I think
So label 4.
I think your base URL is not correct. You got a 90.0 and 30.0. That's
Yes,
not supposed to be here.
That is also true. So we got to delete that. So now you see if in the designer, you look at the designer, we have this text for label 4. And let's see if this is going to work. So New York City, hit go. It should return something, and it just returns this. Oh, so actually the reason is we accidentally copied response type. We have to use response content. So if we type it again, there we go. So as you can see, we have a bunch of information, right, in this really weird format called JSON, and we need to be able to parse it. But if you just look through this sort of slew of information, you can see what we're looking for, right? Because here, where it says state is equal to New York, that's actually exactly what we were looking for. And that's perfect because then we can just take the output of this, we can just take the state New York, and we can put it into our next step. So let's see if I can connect to my iPad here. Okay, never mind, I cannot, it is okay. So we have our state, and that's basically all we need to pull out. And basically, you can think of this JSON format as just a big dictionary. You probably learned about dictionaries, again, a couple of weeks ago. But basically, you ask for a key in the dictionary, and it'll return the corresponding value. And you can see that the key that we're looking for is state. So in MIT App Inventor, the way that you actually do this is you have to go to your web. There should be a method that says JSON text decode with dictionary. So this will actually give you the dictionary that's corresponding to the content. So then if we parse this in, this will give us the dictionary. We can set like this is our dictionary. And then what do we want from our dictionary? We want the dictionary to be, we want to get the value for the key. We want to get the value for a key. What is the key that we want? We want a state. So this is going to be the state. And this should return us the New York value. So if we actually set the label text to this value, we should be able to see that the state is returned correct. Let's try this. Again, hit go. It's going to do its thing. Oh, and there we go. So it says New York. We can try this for a bunch of different other things. We can type Boston. We can hit go. It says MA, which is awesome. We can type in Plano, which is my hometown. And it says Texas, which is great. So that's awesome, right? Because, we've gone through all of, you guys proposed some really good ideas at the beginning. You can manually check, you can make sure that the user types in the state for you, etc. But we're going to override all of that and just use the work that someone else did, someone else who's very smart. They've created this program that can tell you what state you're in based on your coordinates. And we simply use that to our advantage, and we can just get the Texas out. And now we have exactly what we need. So now it's time to just build the next component, right? because now that you know that you're in Texas, you just have to ask the other API, where everything is. And then the API will just give you a list of stuff. So let's create another procedure. We can say get hospitals. And what are we going to take as input? We're going to take in as input the state, right? The state. And so basically we need to make another request. We need to request this API that gives you all the COVID test centers in all the 50 US states using this format. So this is the base URL. These are the parameters. So let's just go ahead and just copy all this. And let's do the same thing that we did for the other web, but just with a new web component. This time we'll add another web component that says web get hospitals. And so this web get hospitals thing, we will first have to set the URL, and we're gonna put in our base URL here. But remember that the state is not actually just Alaska. It is whatever the state is supposed to be, based on what we had earlier. So we're gonna add a join component. We're gonna join this with the state that we wanted. And so this should give us the URL that should query for the state. And all we have to do then is to say web get hospitals. We're gonna call get because this will query it. And then basically we do the same thing again. Once this component gets your text, you can let's just set the label to the the output. Whatever the response content is, let's just take a look at what it is, because we just really want to know what it looks like. And for this case, once web get state got text, we can actually just call get hospitals with this value that we got. So we can just call get hospitals. I think mousing over might give me, okay, no. We can call get hospitals, and the state is exactly this value that we got from there. So let's try this again. You got the hospitals. Let's just say NYC. I don't know if this works. Ah, yeah, there we go, right? So it inferred that we are in the state of New York. And then it gave us a whole list of hospitals in New York that you can go to for all of this, for all this stuff, for getting your COVID test. So this is awesome. But again, it's in this weird format, right? It's like a straight bracket, a curly bracket, some information.
Also, there's some people who do not understand code, so they might not understand what they just saw.
Yeah, exactly, right? So we want to take all of this weird code stuff like you were talking about and put it in a format where it's really pretty and easy for people to understand. So that's what we're going to be doing now. Basically, once you get this, I think it would be really nice to represent it as a dictionary again, because then it's just going to be a list of dictionaries. So what we're going to do is we're going to do the same thing. We're going to first call this parse function. We're going to call this parse function, and let's create a variable because this is something that we're going to need again and again. Let's parse this into a dictionary. We're going to parse it into a dictionary, and let's just set the label to the dictionary. Let's see what it looks like. So this is hospitals. Let's just call this variable hospitals. Let's just get all the hospitals and put them in this thing. So this is basically going to give us a list of dictionaries. Every single hospital is represented as a dictionary, and we have a bunch of them, right? So it's obviously going to be a list. So what do we need to do? We need to put all of these in our list picker, right? Or our list view. Let's actually see. I'm not quite sure if it's supposed to be a list picker or a list view. So let's go to user interface and let's figure out. So your list picker is going to display lists for them to choose, but your list view, it just displays a list of text elements. So I think list view is the correct thing that we need. So let's take a look at
either one is
list
good.
view. Yeah, I think either one is good. And so we can take a look at list view. Let's see what we have here. Elements from strings, set elements. So I think, what you should be able to do is we can set the list view's elements to a certain thing, right? Because if we set the elements to a certain string, then you should be able to see every single component there. So why don't we just, for now, because the hospitals is already a list and this list view is a list, why don't we just set it to hospitals and see what happens? And in the meantime, I will delete label 4 because that's actually not useful. And another thing, I will just set this height to fill the parent because it'll look nice. And then the list view, let's make sure the height is at least, let's say 15% of the screen so that we can actually see things. And then let's look at what the component looks like now. So if I type in NYC, I hit go. Okay, so there's gonna be a bunch of stuff. I think I think this deserves more screen space. So let's increase it a little bit. Let's say we want 25% of the screen to go to the list picker. So now that's a little bit more space to view things. Let's type in NYC and see what happens. Okay, so you have a bunch of things. If I click on these, you can see that these are different components, but basically, we're just gonna have these components. Like this one is going to have, be the first component. This one's gonna be the second component. This is the third one. So it's just a list of all the stuff. But when we're displaying this, we don't necessarily have to display everything. Maybe if you were just doing a list view, then maybe all you need to display is just the name. So let's go ahead and see if we can do that. Let's just see if we can display the name. So let's go to our list view and see if we can just display the name. List view, selection, index, blah, 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 et cetera, et cetera. Okay, so we want to set this to a list of things, right? But we want to build a list of things that just they just get one component of all the dictionaries. We just want the key that says, what's the key? We want the name, and it's called center name. So we just want the thing for center name, and we don't want anything else. So let's see how we can do that. One thing that we can do is we can create like we can create just like a list, and we can just continually add to it, right? List of names. We can initialize it to an empty list, right? We can create an empty list, and we can iterate through all the different elements. We can iterate through all the hospitals. So we can do control. I think you can loop. So for each item in list, so for each hospital in the list of hospitals, we can add to the list of names. So that would be lists. We can add items to lists. So what list are we adding to? We're adding to the list of names. We'll add this to, this is a list. And what is the item? Well, we wanna have a hospital, but this is a dictionary. We wanna get the key that that says the center name, right? Because that gives you the center's actual name that you can display. So if this is the dictionary, the key is center name. And finally, once you have all this list, so this creates a list of names. Then all we have to do is set the list view elements to the list of names that we had. So what this does is if you go back to the cast and we try this again, you hit go. Instead of like having this really ugly stuff where all of the dictionary's elements are printed out, we get this really nice output, right? It's literally just a bunch of names it's really pretty, and you can click on them. It doesn't really
Now
do
people
anything
can
yet, but we'll
understand
figure it out.
without having to like trying to find a way to translate the code.
Yeah, exactly. This is exactly what the whole point of building these apps is. Like, you can't just give people this whole slew of dumb text and expect people to understand. You want to decode it for them so that it's in a really nice format. So that's awesome. Now, now here's the thing. We have all these things at the bottom, but we should also be worrying about the map, right? Because the map should put all these places on markers. So in addition to creating this list of names, we also want to populate the map with some cool stuff. So let's see how we can do that. Let's look at some of these things. So we can create markers on maps, of course. We can do a bunch of stuff. And to add all these things to the map, all we have to do is call this set features. We just create a list of features and we can just set them all. So let's see if we can do that. Basically, we need to create another list, right? Let's say we just duplicate this because it contains a lot of code that we need. So instead of list of names, we want lists of markers, because this is going to be like all the markers that are going to show up on the map, the little red dots that indicate the locations. Let's just create a list of markers. And then for each hospital, we're going to add something to this list of markers. What are we going to add? Well, we're going to want to create a new marker. Let's create a new marker on the map. Uh-oh, my computer's lagging. Let's create a new marker on the map. Should be create marker. And we want to create it at some latitude and longitude. So let's do that. How do we find the latitude and how do we find the longitude of the hospital? Well, for that, we sort of need to look at the API response, which I conveniently have pulled up here. It's literally just the key lat and lon. So if we just ask for the key lat and lon, you will get those things and you should get the markers. So all we have to do now is set, we can go to our map and we can say, we want to set all the elements we want to set the list of features. Let's set the list of features to our list of markers. Let's get it. Cool. So let's take a look. We have our app. We hit NYC. It's going to generate a bunch of stuff, and hopefully there should be some markers on the map. Ah, look, there we go. Very nice. So there are these markers that tell you sort of where everything is. And so that's really pretty. It's super pretty, but there are two problems here. So the first problem is that when we hit NYC, the map didn't automatically zoom to NYC. That's something that we probably want to do. So that's something we can go back to here for. Because once you like literally when the button go is clicked, we can ask the map.
I also have another like worry.
Location.
I also have another worry about the code.
Sure.
The user. Well, okay. Let's say that the user is living in NYC, and when they search up NYC, there's like markers popping up. But they don't even know where they even actually live. What? They don't even know where they actually are in NYC. So we got also add the user thing too.
Yeah, exactly. So this is sort of like the next step. If you had more time, you could basically use the GPS and it could automatically figure out your location. You can also type in your exact location here, like your home address or something, and that still also work. But for now, let's just assume that we only care about NYC. Other things we don't really care about, and we'll look at later. But let's just get back to the zoom. So we kind of want to pan and zoom to a location. So we want to pan to. And so this is the latitude and longitude, and we sort of need to reuse this. And because we're using this so often, we might as well create some new variables because we're going to be reusing them again and again. So let's create a latitude variable and a longitude variable. So this will go there. This will go there. And we can get the state and also at the same time pan to with these two variables. So we can pan to the latitude, we can pan to the longitude. I don't quite know what the zoom parameter is, so we'll just try a bunch and see what is good. Let's just choose 5 for now. Let's just say 5. And let's see what happens. So we have NYC, type go, and it zooms out. 5 is a little bit too much. So let's say, what if we say 2? Zoom in a little bit closer. So we hit go. Oh wait, 2 is worse. Okay, let's zoom in a little bit more by going to 7.
13.
So 7 is
13.
bad. Okay, I had a suggestion for 13. Let's see how this works. Ooh, so 13 is actually very, very close. Maybe we want somewhere in the middle. So maybe let's say 10. If we go to 10, I sort of like that, right? It's like your general metropolitan area. You can sort of see other things in your metropolitan area, and that's sort of good. Cool. So I like the zoom. Now we're cooking, because if we type in San Francisco, we hit go, it's gonna pan us all the way to San Francisco. Oh wait, no, that's not the right SFO. Maybe see, there's a little bit of ambiguity. So let's try San Francisco. It's gonna pan us to this area where generally where you are. Cool. So awesome. So our API is working. It doesn't just work in San Francisco, it also works in California. Wherever you are, we can type Boston or Cambridge.
Or you can even type Beijing. You can even type Beijing.
Yes, you could. Okay, the zoom is a little bit finicky here. Oh, you gotta do Cambridge MA. Okay, interesting. So something is bugged out. in our application. We've probably been using it too much. Okay, but here it's working. Here it's working. We're now in Cambridge MA. So that's sort of like the idea. That's the idea. Anyways, I think we can go in a little bit closer to 5. I think 5 is a good number, because then you just, oh wait, okay, no, that's should be 13. 13 seems like a good number. Okay, yeah, this zooms in on Cambridge. Okay, we're good. We can stop messing with the markers. Anyways, basically what we can do now is we have the markers, we have the zoom. The next component is like when you click these markers, what happens, right? Because now it's not really useful. When you click these markers, let me actually, let me take my connection, let me refresh the screen. And let's go to NYC. So when you click on these markers, it's actually useless because the markers don't actually do anything. What we'd really like is if somebody was on the map, they could click on a marker and then display more information and maybe even give them an option to navigate. So let's look at that. Let's see if there's anything on the map that can help handle this. So, okay, right? So you see when map1.feature click, we have some information on the feature. So let's take a look at what this would output. Let's say we set the label 3 text. Let's set the text to the output, which is just called feature. Let's see what would happen because we don't really know. And the best way to figure out is just to try it. So let's go to cast, let's hit go. And what comes out of label 3? When we click the feature, my phone is kind of frozen. Okay, so it says com.google.appmender.components.runtime.marker, whatever that means. So that's a very strange thing to see, but actually you can decode it because if we go to any component and we go to any marker, we can actually stick this feature in and sort of figure it out. So let's see what this is like. Marker, blah blah blah. Latitude, longitude, stroke color, stroke width, title, type, visible, blah, blah, blah. So there's all this information about the marker, but we're looking for something that can allow us to zoom, that can allow us to pick out the location of, pick out the location that we actually clicked. So I don't see anything here that could actually help us do that. Let's go back to the map and see if there are any functions that can deal with this. So you got features, tap at point, create marker, feature from description, pan to save, all of this. So none of this is really obviously correct. So we will have to look at other ways of being able to do this. So one thing that you can actually do is you can create a marker and actually change it. So basically, you can create these markers, and then once they're clicked, you can perhaps be able to zoom into their address, possibly. Or actually, it's perhaps not possible. I'm not completely sure. The API is a little bit ambiguous on this. But for sure, what we can do is we can look at the list picker first. If we have the list picker and we have some like certain, my computer is glitching. Not sure why it always wants to come back to this page. Okay, we're back. Maybe the list picker, maybe the markers aren't actually useful because when you click them, it'll sort of not work. But what we can definitely do is when we click any of these list pickers, this list view items, we can do something about it. So this, we investigated it, we tried. I don't think it's gonna work, so we can go ahead and delete it. But what we can do is go to the list view, because when the list view, there's something interesting here, which is you can actually figure out what the list view's selection is. So this thing is the callback that happens whenever you click anything on the list view. And let's just see what kinds of parameters the list view has had. Probably the most important one is the selection index. The selection index is basically the index of the element in the array that you selected, and that's basically which hospital. So this actually gives you exactly which hospital you selected. And based on this information, perhaps we can populate these fields that have the name, address, and whatever about this hospital in there. So why don't we do that? One thing that you might notice is that we need a global variable because this is in a different scope as this got text thing. And we are not able to access the local variable in this global scope. So we need to create a global variable called hospital list or hospitals. We can initialize it to nothing. We can initialize it like initially to an empty string. But here, we're going to want to set the global hospitals, set global hospitals to this. And then we can do the rest of our logic in here. And then we don't really need this local variable. But in this manner, we can actually set the global hospitals. And then once this happens, we will be able to access all the hospitals from here. So given this index, basically, we can first figure out which hospital we selected. We can just like create a new variable called hospital. And this is going to be the index. We want to get the index select list item. The index is going to be the selection index, and the list is just going to be the hospitals. So this is going to give us some hospitals. We're going to select the index. And what comes next, right? What comes next? So we have the hospital. We want to set all these parameters to the actual things that are actually represented by the hospital. So we would want to set the label name, the label address, and then once we do these, we'll sort of have a good idea for what we want. Blah, blah, blah. And then let's just set the text. So we can copy this over because this is a dictionary and we want some like information. I think this is called center name. Center name. I don't really know what this is, so let's take a look. It's center name and then address. So this is literally just address. And let's see what happens. We have our cast. If we go to NYC, we have all these things. Hospitals is not bound in the current context. Interesting. I have no clue what that means. But let's see if this works. So actually it does. I don't know what that error was. Could just be a one-off thing. But if you notice, when I clicked on any one of these, the information is populated above. Like if I click on NYS government, it starts saying NYS government, blah, blah, blah. So all of this is working. But you might notice that I accidentally deleted the name : address : thing. So let's add that back in. We can do that with a join. So this one literally just says name and this one says address, or we'll just like address more formally. So now what we should see is that it looks nice. So it's got name : address : and it's really cool. I'm not sure if we need the third label. Let's see if there's any other information that might be cool. Maybe the telephone is important, or maybe the last updated is actually important because this one tells you when was the information about the site last updated. So maybe if it was updated a long time ago, you don't want to go to this place because maybe it's closed. So let's see. Let's set the label, this final label. Let's rename this label because now we know what it is. It's label last updated. We can set last updated and we can say last updated. And the time is this thing called last updated date. So we can go to NYC, we can hit go. It's gonna load all the hospitals. Oh, and then something happens. Hospitals is not bound in the current context. Interesting. So we need to sort of debug this. Let's figure out what happens. Okay, so this one, when we move this out to just a global variable, you can't just call the name, you have to call the global name. So gotta call the global hospital. Now let's try this again. NYC, you hit go. You get all these things, you can click on them, but let's just click on one of them. Let's click on Coney Island Hospital. And there we go, right? Like it gives you all the information. It's on Ocean Parkway down in Brooklyn. It was last updated March of last year.
But how do they
So
know it's actually closed or open? It's just gonna only give the update info, and it's not gonna do anything.
yeah,
So
exactly.
so what's the
That's
point? So we gotta add a status update.
yeah, exactly. So that's actually, you know, one thing that this API doesn't do so well, because maybe it was created back when COVID was really bad last year, about a year ago. But right now it's maybe not actively maintained. But sort of the point of this project was to show you how powerful APIs can be, where you don't have to be able to accumulate this information to be able to store it. All you have to do is call it and it just does it for you. So just imagine that all these were recently updated, and we can actually even add something else. We can add a phone number so that you can maybe call it if you want to confirm that they're actually active. So we can add another, we can even add another text box to phone number. I won't do it today because in the interest of time, but we can do that in the future. So this was last updated. All right. Maybe, you know, one of the things that we talked about earlier that I think Brandon brought up was that you should be able to have turn-by-turn directions. It would be awesome if you could just ask the app, you know, how do I get there, and have it just be able to do that. So that's actually what we're gonna do today. Let's see if we can do that. So let's move all this stuff into a vertical arrangement actually, so that we can put things side by side. And let's add another vertical arrangement. Oh wait, is this a vertical arrangement? Okay, that's my bad. It should have been horizontal. So we can move this in there. We can move this in there. We can delete this one. And so side by side, we can also have a button, like a button that says navigate. And when you click it, it should open up some like Google Maps thing where you can just automatically have turn-by-turn directions take you there. And let's make this one fill the parent. Fill parent. This one, let's make this height fill the parent as well. And let's make this centered. So how do we center it? We go to this, we can align vertical to the center, and it'll just say navigate. So now your interface should look a little bit different. You have a location. We'll just go to NYC, and then we can click on any of these. It'll say Glen Island Park, Wayman Ave, blah, blah, blah. So there we go. And when you click navigate, it should take you where you want to go. So that's the next feature we want to implement. So when navigate, when button btn navigate, when this thing is called, we want to be able to navigate to where we're going. So we'll just hit click. So actually now is sort of like a point where you hope that you have some kind of interaction with Android, because if you can simply just open the Google Maps app and pass in your address, that would be awesome, because then it'll just directly give you directions, and then you won't have to do any other work. You don't have to sign up for the API that MIT App Inventor requires you to have access to if you want to do things with their navigation module. So if we just Google this, MIT App Inventor open in Google Maps, there should be some information that we can use. So like map it, displaying locations on a Google map. Let's see. View on map. So this actually uses the map. It's not actually what I'm looking for. Okay, so this is what I'm looking for. This isn't a tutorial about accessing Google Maps using Activity Starter. So basically you can have some address, you can call the Activity Starter, and it will just open it in Google Maps, and you'll be able to navigate, you know, use Google Maps' awesome turn-by-turn directions without actually having to do anything. So for that, we're gonna need this thing called the Maps Activity Starter.
I'm having problems with the hospital stuff, like the location of nearest hospital.
So what do you mean by that? Location of nearest hospital?
So basically, yeah, I got the navigation thing good, but the hospital thing, like it says it's got error, although I put like give out. Well, basically, the marker's like not going to the nearest hospital. It just went to Boston.
So I'm not completely sure what you mean. We can debug this together later, but I sort of want to go through everything. This is sort of the last feature that I'm going to implement for the class, and then maybe we can debug this offline. That sound good? All right, cool. So let's go ahead and follow this guy's tutorial and see if we can open up the Google Maps whenever we click this thing. So I think connectivity is where the activity started. So we have an activity starter, and we have to copy the parameters that this guy has, right? He says Android intent action view. So we got to put this in android.intent.action.view. That looks like it's correct. Let's make sure that it's correct by scrolling through the video because he types all this in and you might not be able to see. So view is that's it, but the activity class is next com.google.android. And then let's see what else he types. .maps activity. Okay, so .maps activity. So that's next. The activity package is another thing. com.google.android.apps.maps. Okay, .android.apps.maps. And the next part, I think, is when you're going to pass in the URI, pass in the address that you're trying to navigate to. So let's see. Data URI. You're going to set the data URI to the text and you're going to start the activity. Awesome. So basically what happens next is whenever your navigation button is clicked, you need to figure out what the address is. And what we can do is do the same thing when the list picker after picking, because at this point, you're going to have the index of your selection from the list picker. So we know what the hospital is. We're going to want to set the activity starters URI to the address. So we set the URI, data URI, we set it to the address, which we can get here. This is literally the address. And then we can call activity starter.start. And let's see what happens. So we can start the activity. So basically what this does is it sets the URL that you're looking for to the address that you want to navigate to. And then it'll go into the backends of Android and pull up Google Maps and take you there. So NYC, if we click the NYS government, you have this information, South Piedmont, Stony Brook, blah, blah, blah. And if I click navigate, it pulls up Google Maps. But it doesn't actually give me anything on the, it doesn't actually take me directly there. So this is a problem and we need to debug it. So it's not working. Let's go back. So clearly, we try this again, NYS government. It opens Google Maps just fine, but it looks like our data URI is wrong because it doesn't actually take us to where we're going. So let's take a look again at this dude's video and see if we can figure out what's going on. Okay, whoops. So he's doing this, he starts the activity. He's got this thing, it should open. Okay, so he says, I see. So the data URI actually has to be in this format, maps.google.com/maps with a Q, and the Q gives you the address. So actually, what we need to do instead of doing what we did is add this like format. So we need to actually set the URI to something with a join, and we're gonna have to do HTTPS maps.google.com. What else? And we're just gonna have a /maps, and then the Q is going to be the address. So if we do this, let's see what happens. So I hit navigate. There we go. So it gives you the address and it gives you this this location, and I can hit directions. I can hit directions. I'm in New York City. It says I'm gonna take 55 minutes to get there. I could take the 2 train there. And yeah, and then you could hit start and it gives you turn by turn directions. And it's really cool. So basically, we're back at it, trying to take advantage of things that other people have built to make our lives easier. So we can actually do something else, you know, maybe we don't want to go to Brooklyn, maybe we want to go somewhere else. So let's go back. Um, Maybe, no, Rochester is really far. What about MedRite Urgent Care? That's in Spring Valley, New York, which doesn't seem so great. Let's try Glen Island Park in my government, Staten Island, see Staten Island. If we hit navigate, that's gonna say directions. I could take the AC and then the R, then the lift. That's gonna take me 1 hour and 14 minutes. So as you can see, you can sort of gauge all these things by, you can gauge all these things really easily with MIT App Mentor, and using the activity starter to start the Google Maps thing, which you had no business building, like you did not build it at all, but you can definitely use it and take advantage of it. Just really very seamless, and it's overall like a good way to be able to have people interact with your app. Cool. So just to recap of where we are, you can type your location anywhere you want. You know, let's just say we try saying Seattle. If we hit go, it'll zoom us into Seattle. There are a bunch of places around. You can click any of these. It'll give you the name, the address, when it was last updated. You can switch through any of these, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. And for any of these, if you ever want to navigate, you can just hit navigate and you'll have directions to be able to get there. Now, if I were to go from here, like in New York City to there, it'd take me 2 days and 23 hours to get to Seattle to test. So that probably wouldn't be a great idea. But you sort of get the gist, right? You have this really cool thing where you can find all the testing centers around you, and then whenever you find one, actually navigate to it. So just as a time check for the organizers, how much time do I have left? When is the class supposed to end?
Yeah, you have 1 more minute.
Oh, okay. So I have 1 minute. Awesome. Cool. So hopefully this is pretty much all I'll be able to build today. There are other things that you could definitely do with this. For example, if you ever go to a location, let's say NYC, and you're clicking through these like things, it would be awesome if you could have the map zoom to the location on that of that location. And clearly, you know, we do have all the information that's required, because remember, we did zooming earlier, and all you need to know is the latitude and longitude. And it just happens to be that you actually do know the latitude and the longitude
Dad, smell bleach.
from the API.
Sorry.
Oh, William, you're unmuted. Okay, all good. You can actually have this scroll whenever you click on anything to have it pan and zoom to wherever it is, and that give you a better spatial understanding of, you know, where everything is. So that's one option. Another option is, for example, you might add another button over here in the top right, so that people can call the hospital to see if they're open, you know, in case they're worried that it's not going to work, or all of these kinds of things. You want to be able to take advantage of all the information that's given to you in the API and present it in sort of like the nicest way possible. And that's sort of the goal here. But anyways, yeah, we've come a long way, right? Because originally at the very beginning, we had this very daunting task where you have to figure out where all the hospitals are. You have to display everything in a super nice way. But eventually, we've come to using 2 APIs, not just one. We've used 2 APIs because the problem that we're solving is a little bit more complicated, and we needed that API to help us figure out what state some certain location is. And then we called the API, and then we were able to display everything in a really nice way. You know, I think William was mentioning, you seem like you have to be able to understand code to really parse this JSON response. That's very confusing from the server. But what we've done is we've created this interface where people that do not know how to code can use it and use these things in very easy ways. And I think the most remarkable thing about all of this is that you all learned how to code. Maybe you first touched code maybe, I don't know, like 4 weeks ago, 5 weeks ago, which is insane to me, because you have these awesome tools at your disposal where you can build things that are actually useful. This is actually an application on my phone that can help people in many ways. In this case, navigate to their COVID testing spots. So yeah, that's pretty much all I have for today. And at this point, I'd like to return the time back to the organizers and just say, congrats, by the way, for finishing the course, because at such a young age, this is incredible stuff that you're doing, and I can't really wait to see what you all accomplish in the future.